This is episode 78 with Joe Sanok.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
Don't be afraid to do things differently. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Brian Tier, and those were actually my wise words when I was a guest recently on my buddy Joe Sanok's show. Now, in case you haven't heard of him, Joe Sanok is a former guest of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, and he recently had me sit down on his show to share what I'd learned about 20-somethings and millennials as a result of running this show. Now, before we get into the show, a quick shout out again to our cool sponsors, Rooster. Rooster is the awesome new alarm clock app that allows you to wake up to sports news, world news headlines. I've got a channel on there, and pretty much anything else you want, even friends and family voice notes, rather than that boring same old alarm clock every single morning. You can find it on the Google Play Store or the iStore. And again, that is Rooster. I urge you to go check it out. Some really cool stuff they've got on there, and a cool bunch of guys running the show as well. Now, on to today's episode. As I mentioned, Joe was on the Quarter Life Comeback back in episode 48. And we originally planned to speak about what I've learned about 20-somethings and millennials hosting this podcast, but the discussion quickly turned to other topics. As I mentioned before, I always love the opportunity to give back by being a guest on other people's shows, and it was awesome being able to share all the knowledge I've accumulated from interviewing my guests. I decided to share this episode with you guys because there was so much good content that we spoke about, and really grateful that I've been able to accumulate this knowledge and this kind of wisdom from interviewing all the people I have. Now, in this episode, you're going to learn why you don't need to know what's coming next, how I've pivoted my journey to find my purpose, how to come up with a name for your business, 3 reasons I started a podcast, how to get started with a new project idea, and how to keep millennials like us engaged at work. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at briantier.com/078. But for now, guys, let's go hang out with me and Joe Sanok.
My guest today, Brian Tier, he's made some awesome decisions, and he is sort of an expert on people in their 20s, and this is just such a fun interview. So without any further ado, I give you Brian Tier. Well, today on the Practice of the Practice podcast, we have Brian Tier. He is a coach and the host of the Quarter Life Comeback, where he empowers 20-somethings to create their own path in life. Having started his career as an engineer, Brian soon realized that there was more to life, and he decided to leave his job to make a bigger impact in the world. After backpacking solo through Southeast Asia, I got to ask you about that. I've done that too. He returned to South Africa, where he began a journey of personal growth and experimentation with things that interested him. He now helps others do the same via his work as a coach and podcast host. Brian, welcome to the show.
Joe, thank you so much for having me, and welcome to everyone listening.
Yeah. So tell me about backpacking through Southeast Asia.
Yeah, man, it was really cool. When I was sort of growing up at school and even at varsity, you used to hear people where you'd ask them what they want to do one day, and like a lot of them would say, I just want to take a year off and go traveling. And I used to think it was so cliched until I did it myself. And how that came about is, so I quit my job which I'm sure we'll get into, 3 years ago. But 2 years before that, I went backpacking with, it was hardly backpacking in the sense like I did when I went on my own, but I went with 3 friends, and we spent 2 weeks in Thailand. And that's kind of when the travel bug bit. And then I was like, now I kind of get why these people are saying they want to travel. And then when I did quit my job 3 years ago, my dad actually said to me, well, are you going to take a bit of time off to go traveling now? Which surprised me because he's really old school and I didn't expect that from him. But I did. I took a couple of months and this time I went on my own and I did the whole sort of Southeast Asian route. And it was really transformational. I didn't go there with the idea of like, I'm going to have some major personal breakthrough, which maybe helped in the end because that is kind of what happened. But yeah, it was amazing. I went to Thailand and Laos, Vietnam and Cambodia.
Oh, wow. So when you were doing that traveling, you kind of just went into it like, I'm just going to kind of see this area, but it eventually kind of transformed you in some way?
Yeah, when I left school, I didn't really know what I wanted to study or do one day. And then I ended up studying engineering, civil engineering. And I realized like 2.5 years into that like, I don't think this is the thing. And I didn't really know what that thing was. And so I went traveling kind of just to take a bit of time off. The way that I kind of think of it now is almost like a gap year, but just a couple of months and not a whole year. And just like, I guess in hindsight, if I look back, it was not really putting too much pressure on myself to know what was coming next. But yeah, just kind of taking some time off and enjoying myself and I guess putting myself in a new environment to kind of get some new insights.
Yeah, I love those moments when you're at like a youth hostel or you're just hanging out at a pub or something and you meet all these people from all over the world that are just kind of traveling and seeing different things and you get these tips on, oh, have you been here? Have you been here? Oh, you got to go here.
Totally.
There's something about that travel culture that it's just so addictive.
Totally. And I am, so a great example of that is, so I only booked my first night's accommodation, which we'd stayed at 2 or 3 years prior when I went with my friends. So I booked my ticket and my first night accommodation. And other than that, I kind of knew where I wanted to go, but I didn't book anything. So it gave me the flexibility. And when I got to Cambodia, I was just going to go to Phnom Penh and Siem Reap. And so many people I met along the way were like, no, you've got to go to Koh Rong. You've got to go to Koh Rong, which was really off the path of where I was planning to go through. But I went and it was this tiny little island. There's no development on the island, no roads or cars or anything. It's just a few sort of family run guest houses and bars on the main strip of beach and everything else is untouched. And that was really a big highlight of my trip. It was the Soccer World Cup at the time and Chile was playing and there was like a whole lot of Chilean fans on the beach. It was amazing.
Wow. That's so funny. So right after my freshman year of college, we're not even going to talk about what we were planning to talk about. We'll just talk about traveling. So after my freshman year of college, I was going to go to Europe with one of my friends, but he got in trouble and couldn't leave the state. He was on probation. So I decided to go to Europe anyway and bought a ticket where I flew into Dublin and was flying out of Cologne, Germany. And I had a Eurail pass and all I had was a general itinerary of where I was going to go and just would get off the train and find a youth hostel. And I found myself in Amsterdam the night of the European Cup finals being in Amsterdam. Like I got off the train, didn't even realize it was going on. And it was like all of Europe had come to Amsterdam for this huge event. And I found a place to stay at this hostel. And yeah, I'm with you. Travel does something to your soul. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of people ask me, what's it like traveling alone? And I think I'd kind of tie that into not making sort of 100% fixed plans before you leave too, because to me, the joy of traveling is it forces you to get a little uncomfortable and puts you in a new environment. And if you plan everything before you leave, you're not really opening yourself up to those sort of spontaneous moments and that kind of thing. And like traveling on my own, you're either gonna be forced to make friends and get out your comfort zone, or you're gonna have a boring holiday, a lonely holiday. So yeah, I really enjoyed traveling on my own, and even now that I have a girlfriend, she understands that. Like I've said to her, solo traveling is still kind of an important thing to me. So there is chance that I'm gonna do that, and it's not me saying to her that I don't want you to come with me or get in my space, but it's just like sometimes I'd want to spend time with her and sometimes I want to do my own thing. And she's really supportive of that, and it works the other way around too.
Yeah, I remember this moment up in the Annapurna region of Nepal. I was trekking through there with a friend, and we were going to be in Kathmandu for, I think, 3 nights at the end to just kind of see it more. And someone was like, you have to go down to the Chitwan jungle. And we went down there. We hadn't planned it, and it was unreal. I did a whole podcast a while back about getting chased by a wild rhinoceros. I'll have to put that in the show notes as to which one that was. But I knew that I could outrun the Peace Corps volunteer because she and her non-boyfriend that had traveled across the world, and he thought he was going to become a boyfriend, they were definitely slower than me. So I was like, if I just outrun them, then I'm good.
Yeah, you don't need to worry about the rhinoceros, just the next slowest.
Just outrun the slowest people. So, well, Brian, so you go on this adventure and you have some realizations, and you've quit your job as a civil engineer, and then you end up doing this podcast and this website. Take us through just some of the origins of wanting to explore kind of the quarter life comeback. Where did that idea come from? What have you been discovering from doing this project?
Yeah, so I guess where the idea came from is I've always been interested in health and development and sort of personal growth. I almost studied to become a doctor and then decided not to at the last minute. So I've always been interested in helping other people and that kind of thing. And when I was traveling, I kind of realized that like this is what the voices are telling me. Like, I need to focus on helping other people, whatever that looked like. And when I came back, it started looking like personal training. So I became a certified personal trainer and did that. But I kind of realized that fitness was only sort of part of being healthy. And then that kind of evolved into, well, being healthy is only a part of living a sort of successful and fulfilling life. And then it just kind of merged to more sort of life coaching type of stuff that I do now. And, I'd started a previous blog and decided to rebrand last year to my personal domain, briantier.com. And when I was doing that rebranding, I was thinking, you see everyone, and this might be a valuable lesson for people listening, like, everyone says if you try to speak to everyone, you're speaking to no one. And like, you've got to know who you're speaking to in your business in order to get some traction and also to improve your marketing message and all that kind of stuff. So I was thinking like personal development and self-help is a very broad topic, but how can I sort of channel that into speaking to someone who I feel really passionate about helping? And to me, that was like the Brian a couple of years before who felt lost and who felt like there was something bigger, like he was meant for bigger things, but he maybe didn't know exactly what that was or like how to get there. And so I was actually on a mastermind call with a friend of mine, and I can't remember how it was, but I just suddenly had this name, like the Quarter Life Comeback, a play on the quarter life crisis that we hear about. And I felt like, it's really catchy. And I've got this kind of unofficial rule to myself when I come up with a name for a blog or a brand or a business where the domain must be available, the social media handles should be available, maybe even a hashtag if possible. It should be a nice sort of abbreviation. So Quarter Life Comeback was like the QLC. And all those things, I kind of looked. The domain name was open and the social media handles weren't taken and I could abbreviate it. And it sounded catchy. And I was like, maybe this is the thing. And I was really inspired by like Christine Hasler and Jenny Blake, who had Life After College and that kind of stuff. And Jacob Sokol. And it just felt like all these sort of hints culminated and resulted in this name popping up in my head. And I was like, this is the direction, at least for the next while. Because I think everything we do is sort of constantly evolving, but this felt like the thing right now. And it allowed me to speak about these different topics that I was passionate about, but in a way that I can channel it to a specific audience member. And then the podcast itself, I'd kind of dabbled in it a bit with my previous blog, but I decided to focus on that with this new direction for 3 primary reasons. The first was I could grow my network and sort of connect with people like you, Joe, who was on my podcast.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I could connect with people doing really cool things and grow my own network. The second was that I didn't have to be or pretend to be the expert and know it all on all these topics, which I would never want to do. I could get people on who knew more about this stuff than I did. And the third was like, I wanted to ask these questions too. and in the process, like help other people going through the same thing. So, if you just reach out to someone via cold email and say, I'd love to speak to you for 20 minutes, they're going to look at this email and be like, delete. But if suddenly
or they'll say it's going to cost this much money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you suddenly frame it from like, hey, I've got a podcast aimed at helping 20-somethings overcome this sort of stage of life, and I'd love to share your message and your expertise with the audience, suddenly that's a lot more appealing. And people will want to, I believe that human beings are kind of hardwired to want to help and contribute. And I think just those three things coming together made me decide, I think a podcast is a good thing to do. Yeah. And since doing it, I've made amazing connections, and haven't monetized directly from the podcast in terms of sponsorships, but it's led to other opportunities that have brought in income. It's led to myself and guests bringing in clients. So it's been really rewarding over the last 60 weeks now, actually.
Wow. So I think one thing that happens to counselors that are listening, or private practice owners that are listening, is oftentimes, their private practice is going well. They're past the startup phase. They're starting to grow. They may even be to that scaling phase, where they're over $100,000 a year. And they have this idea similar to how you had this quarter life comeback idea. And then that idea just kind of sits with them and just kind of dies a slow death. What advice do you have for people that have an idea of a podcast or an e-course or some way that they want to contribute in helping the world?
It's funny because I ask a similar question to a lot of my guests, and my advice is just start, just do it. And that might sound really sort of vague, but the way that I'd suggest is find, I think whenever we're facing a decision and it feels intimidating or like we don't know where to start or it's confusing, I think it's because the next step that we're thinking of taking is too big, and we need to just break that down and make it into a smaller, more achievable step. So maybe that's starting with sending out more Instagram stories so that you get used to speaking in front of a camera or interacting with people. Or maybe it's creating a SoundCloud account where you can upload sort of audio files. But think of what you want to achieve, and then just think of a really small step that's going to be a low barrier to you committing and taking action. And then the other useful thing I'd suggest is give yourself permission to quit if it's not working out, and treat it like a project. So for example, I've done my podcast for the last 60 weeks, but if you're getting started, say to yourself, I'm going to give this 3 months. And if after 3 months it's getting traction, or if I'm not enjoying it, let me rephrase. After 3 months, if it's getting traction and I'm really enjoying it and it's helping people and it's achieving the goal of what I intended when I created this thing, then cool, carry on. But if not, and it's not getting traction and you're not enjoying it, then it's okay to just quit and move on to the next thing. And I think it's actually important to know when to quit, because then there could be other opportunities that might have benefited you and your audience more that you're missing out on because you've got this stubbornness of I will not quit this thing.
Right. I think that's interesting. I'm really glad you bring that up, because probably one of the biggest mindset shifts for my consulting clients, and then also people in my mastermind group, is that idea of experimenting. In grad school, so often we're taught, write a paper, do the research, polish it, and then turn it in perfect, which is totally different than let's experiment, let's change, let's switch things around and just kind of try it differently and challenge the status quo. And it sounds like what you're saying is find some small steps. So even just, is the website domain available? Is the hashtag available? Mm-hmm. Is the Twitter handle available? Take those small steps, give yourself a timeline to see if you're getting any results or traction, and then give yourself permission to quit. To me, that's the way I would summarize that, is experiment and give yourself permission to just see it as, I'm just testing it out.
Yeah, one of the biggest questions, Joe, that obviously 20-somethings are asking is how do I find my purpose or my passion? Mm-hmm. And I interviewed a guy named Tom Asak, and he said, I actually gave a talk 3 weeks ago, and I mentioned this in the talk. He said, too many people are trying to sit and think about what their passion is, but your passion's not out there, it's in here. So for example, it's inside of you. You're not going to find it by thinking about it. You're going to find it by exploring and experimenting with things that interest you, and then working out from the inside, like, this feels really good. Let me go with this thing. And from there, you kind of figure it out and learn more about yourself.
It's sort of like, imagine if you had sat around in South Africa and said, I wonder if I have a passion for traveling solo around the world versus like traveling solo around the world. Like, you never would have discovered it unless you just went out and tried it. And maybe you would have hated it, but you ended up really liking it.
Totally. And yeah, like, I could have sat and looked and researched, like, where am I going to go on this day? And then, like, what can I do on this thing? But, at some point you just have to dive in, and opportunities will emerge that you could never have imagined before, and relationships and all kinds of stuff like that you can't think about when you're getting started. So at some point you just have to commit and take those small actions, and then new doors will open as you go.
Yeah. So, Brian, you interview tons of people that are doing things in their 20s, also people that help that kind of age demographic. Tell us some things that you've discovered about 20-somethings, how to work with 20-somethings, what 20-somethings, are looking for. Because I think so often I hear, oh, they're so entitled, or they're still on their parents' couch. And there's kind of these just stereotypes of 20-somethings that I know aren't accurate. But in your interviews and on your podcast, what have you discovered?
Yeah, I think the big one that comes up straight away is 20-somethings are changing jobs a lot, and millennials. So millennials isn't just 20-somethings, but it's 20s and 30s at the moment. So they're changing jobs a lot, and I think to keep a millennial or a 20-something engaged, it's more about sort of personal growth inside of them. So things like mentorship on the job, being connected to the purpose of the company, and not just throwing a salary at them. It's funny that I think 20-somethings today are driven more by getting a sort of a sense of meaning out of the work they're doing than just by throwing bigger numbers at them. So I think if you can create this sort of engaging environment where they are able to grow and work towards something bigger and something that they feel aligned with, that's going to help a lot. The mentorship capacity, like I mentioned, is a big one. Let me try and think what else.
Well, it's funny, as you say those things, yeah. I'm just wrapping up Elon Musk's biography right now, and it's really interesting to think about how he has motivated, 20-somethings that are fresh out of college to work these like 90-hour weeks for lower wages than they could get at, NASA or for Boeing. And the idea is that they're genuinely trying to save the human race, that they want to have a multi-planetary race, and Mars is the backup plan, and we're going to create a low-cost spaceship that is going to be able to get supplies to Mars and eventually people to Mars. Like, for a geeky engineer that's read sci-fi and is interested in helping the world, that's way more compelling than, you could make 3 times more and you could hate your job and kind of hate your life, but you'll make 3 times more money.
Yeah, and I think it's all a cycle. Like, just throwing money at people to try and entice them, I think that's what leads to this thing we call the quarter life crisis. Is people like, well, I'm making the money, I've got a good title, but I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel excited when I wake up to go to work. And I'm not saying that has to be the case every day. There's still days where I wake up and I'm like, got to get up now, no more snooze button.
Oh man, I often say to my wife, can we just cancel life today? Like, the first half hour of my day is always dragging. Those people that spring out of bed, I'm like, how do you spring out of bed? I always, every morning, it's I just want to sleep.
So I do think there's a sort of a misperception that living your passion or following your purpose looks like waking up super excited every day. Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of it's probably more so than when you're just working in a normal day job. But it doesn't mean that every day is going to be sunshine and roses. So yeah, I think coming back to our question, that the sort of the mentorship and the connecting to a bigger vision, and then just things like the 20-somethings are way more lifestyle driven than just money. So benefits like having a really fun, collaborative working environment, things like that. It's like getting out and active within the workforce, so interacting with their colleagues and that kind of thing. I think creating a more engaging environment for people to work in.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to mentorship, so what comes to mind, like with Practice of the Practice, is, so for example, I have Sam, who's one of my virtual assistants, but she's so much more than that. She does tons of marketing stuff. She helps with a lot of just kind of the direction of Practice of the Practice. I've noticed that in teaching her more about WordPress, more about SEO, more engagement with people that are writing for the website, that for her, that's like a whole new skill set that whether she stays with me or I'm sure that someday she'll leave, I hope not soon, that she'll be able to take that with her, that she'll be able to say, I know SEO, I know WordPress, I can, work with, people across countries and time zones. That I would guess is kind of the type of thing you're talking about in regards to mentorship. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, I think so. Just giving people responsibility and opportunities to learn and grow, and not just sort of sit and crunch numbers. Mm-hmm. And yeah, guidance from someone older that maybe they aspire to be like, and kind of partnering them with people like that, so that it's not just the skills they learn on the job, but also just sort of life skills in general as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when it comes to what maybe we as business leaders can do to continue to mentor 20-somethings and to maybe learn from them, what are maybe skills that 20-somethings bring into our businesses that we wouldn't expect that they would bring in?
Let me think about that one.
Well, one thing, like you had mentioned, do more Instagram stories. What's that? I know what Instagram is. I know what Instagram video is, but what's an Instagram story?
Yeah, so stories is video content as well, but it only lasts for 24 hours, and it's a lot more informal and sort of behind the scenes. You'll notice in your Instagram there's like little circles at the top of people's accounts, and it's just sort of not temporary content, but what's the word I'm looking for? It disappears within 24 hours.
So similar to like how Snapchat stuff disappears.
It's pretty much Snapchat, but in Instagram, and Facebook have the same thing now. And I think that's something that 20-somethings can bring is they seem to have a pulse on sort of culture and what people are doing and consuming and looking at these days. I think they have a lot more peripheral skills, so they're not just good at one thing, but they kind of like sort of jacks of all trade in a way as well, and they can work on a lot of different things. And I think 20-somethings, like I said earlier, they're keen and excited and driven to connect to a bigger vision. So I think if you can tap into like what the employees are sort of motivated by, and then show them that they can work towards that, or that they will be working towards that in the business, I think that'll be a big motivating factor.
That's awesome. I think that so often, each generation has kind of their own nuances, and instead of drilling into it and trying to figure out how each generation can help one another, but also guide one another, we create these stereotypes oftentimes. So it's so helpful to have a podcast like yours that's really drilling in and saying, okay, what is it during your quarter life comeback that 20-somethings need to learn, but also what can they offer the world to become successful entrepreneurs before they're in their 30s or 40s or 50s?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the other thing that comes to mind is 20-somethings are really driven to make an impact now. And it's not just about like following a path. They're asking questions like, is this something I want to be doing? And I think business owners also have to be very aware of that. If you can't create an environment that your employees really want to be in, like regardless of the salary, they're probably going to move on. I think I spoke to Paul Sohn a couple of weeks ago, and I can't remember the figure he said. I think he said like millennials will change jobs. Like, oh, man, it was like, I'm trying to remember the figures now. It's a crazy amount of times, like more than a handful of times that they'll change careers. And so I think that's something to be aware of as well. is that they're not scared to move on and kind of take the dangerous, uncomfortable, unpredictable route.
Yeah, like even when I used to work at the community college here in our town, the amount of people that had worked there 40 years and they were retiring, with the previous generation, there was a ton of people that they just worked there their whole careers. But then when I looked at my generation, and I fall right on that kind of cusp between Gen X and millennials. I'm one of the youngest Gen Xers, and my wife is one of the oldest millennials. So I'm sure my wife loves being called old. But when you look at it, so many people in my age demographic, they'd be at the college for a couple years and then they'd move on, because most places in traditional higher education and traditional businesses, they can't keep up with the costs of, say, healthcare or inflation to be able to give you a raise. And so for me, every year I worked there, I was losing money because our healthcare costs went up faster than, what our raises went up. And so what happens is this whole freelance economy has started in a really positive way, where it's like, kind of the Ubers of the world, Airbnb, you see it everywhere. All of this on-demand type things that cut out the middleman has made it that people can really create the kind of job and lifestyle they want, but it does take kind of that know-how. And so it's really kind of cool, but I think it's such a different model than what people are used to, that it takes guides like yourself to really walk them through how to do that well.
Yeah, and I think what's exciting is that people aren't really bothered about how old people are now. It's more about, like, can they deliver the result that they're looking for? And with things like YouTube and that kind of thing, you don't even have to get a formal qualification to learn how to do something that people are looking for, which is exciting both for the 20-somethings themselves, but also for employers, I think, because they don't need to go and you don't need to go and hire someone who studied for 4 years. If you're looking for a specific result, you can find someone on a freelancing site like Upwork or something like that, someone who can deliver the skills and who will probably work for less than someone with a formal qualification.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much knowledge that you've acquired over the 60 weeks of your podcast, and I look forward to having you back on the podcast. Brian, if every practice owner was listening right now worldwide, what would you want them to know?
I think I want to come back to what we said earlier, Joe, is if there's something that you're thinking of trying in your business, just experiment with it and do it. Like, just give it a start and commit to doing it for a certain period. Like, I'm going to do this for the next 3 months or 10 weeks or whatever it is, and just try it. And if it doesn't work, then cool, at least you've tried. But if it does work, then you might have sort of broken through some new developments in your industry. And so, that's just the advice I'd offer, is if there's something that you're thinking of doing, just implement it and see where it goes. Don't be afraid to do things differently.
Such good advice. I have a video series it's a video training about how to stop being paralyzed by perfection. So if you're listening now and you want to check that out, it's over at practiceofthepractice.com/perfection. You can actually see how terrible my website was when I first launched it, and it'll make you feel really good about how nice your website is now. So Brian, if people want to get in touch with you, they want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm lucky enough that I have kind of a normal name, but also unique enough to have my name in all the handles. So pretty much everywhere on social media, I'm at Brian Teare. That's BryanTeare. Twitter especially, I like to hang out, but also Facebook and Instagram. You can find me there. And then my website is brianteare.com, and feel free to email me. It's brian@brianteare.com. And then I have put together a little giveaway for people listening as a way to say thanks for having me on, Joe. And
awesome.
People can find at brianteare.com/Joe. And what they'll find when they go there is a little ebook that I put together with 5 exercises for creating a bit more self-awareness. We mentioned self-awareness earlier, and knowing what interests you and what things you're good at. And this guide will kind of help you answer some questions to shed some more light on that. And again, that's brianteare.com/Joe.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thanks so much for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Joe, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up episode 78 of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. And a big thanks for Joe for interviewing me on his show and allowing me to use that interview on the Quarter Life Comeback right over here. If you enjoyed this one, please share it around with your friends on social media and shoot me a tweet at Brian Tier to let me know your biggest takeaway. I just want to urge you guys again, if you have an idea for a project, get started. Find that small first step and just do it. Change course along the way. And remember, give yourself permission to fail and to quit. It's okay. And then you move on to the next thing. I'm really excited about a brand new Facebook group that I've launched called the Mastery Mastermind with Brian Tier. You guys can find that at briantier.com/FB group. I'd love to see you in there. I'm going to be sharing exclusive content, some behind the scenes stuff of how I like to get things done, make more time for the things that are really important, and just be that little bit more sort of, productive and that kind of thing. Again, if you want to get all the links and resources we mentioned in this episode, head on over to briantier.com/078 and make sure you subscribe at quarterlifecomeback.com to get all these episodes and more as soon as they go live. I realize that's a ton of stuff for you guys to remember, but the big one, again, the Facebook group, briantier.com/FB group. Thank you so much again for joining me, and until next time, keep creating your quarter life comeback.